I love that I said at the end of the last video, I gotta go eat before I film this next video, but I'm in the same room wearing the same shirt. I don't think it would matter to you guys. I mean, yeah, those will be uploaded at different times, but what does it matter? I don't know. It's a mental note for myself that happened to make it into the video. Either way, welcome back to I Want to Talk About, the series where I take a topic, I sit on camera, and I blabber about it. And again, we're getting close to the end of this series within a series, so today I want to talk about my favorite games of 2021. At this point, chances are you know the rules, but then again, if this is your first video in this series, throughout these videos, I take a look at what a certain year was like in the gaming world, specifically in the console landscape, and I get into a bunch of different games from a given year. I talk about some big games that I didn't play, some games that I did play but that I would consider just missed the cut kind of games, like 7 out of 10 games on a personal scale. The cream before the crop, which is 8 and 9 out of 10 games, and then my proper best list of 10 out of 10 games. So let's blow through the actual intro on the year itself. 2021 was a year that was still a bit of a trying time for game developers because the devs were still battling through COVID. Many of them were, as far as I know, still developing from home, and stock shortages for consoles and things like that were very major. I mean, 2021 was the year that my brother got me the Xbox Series X, but honestly, I couldn't believe he was able to find one. Both consoles went through pretty major shortages, which was sad because it felt like both of them had their fair share of good games in 2021. The first-party lineups were doing pretty well that year, and the acquisition wars also continued in 2021. Again, throughout the late 2010s into the early 2020s, it's been about acquiring developers and things like that, and 2021 was a big one. Sony had been buying devs like Housemarque and Bluepoint, who had been making games for them up to that point, while Microsoft officially completed its acquisition of Bethesda, which had been announced in late 2020. This one was a huge deal because it was the first time in this acquisition era that one of the publishers bought a fully self-autonomous publisher. Most of the time they just stuck to buying different developers, but now they were buying a whole-on publisher. And Nintendo bought a developer, wildly enough, in Next Level Games. They don't usually do the whole acquisition thing, but it's surprising this one didn't happen years before it actually did. Next Level had been pretty much working with Nintendo for almost 2 decades, and at a point were pretty much working exclusively with Nintendo. How did that not happen sooner? But again, beyond the acquisitions and stuff like that, it still felt like the Series X and the PS5 did have some fairly good first-party titles in 2021, in spite of the mess of the world around. And the Switch actually had a pretty good lineup in 2021 too, which was kind of crazy because a lineup like what it had in 2021 would have flatlined in the Wii U era, but in 2021, it was peak. Again, goes into how much better the Switch era as a whole was for Nintendo compared to the Wii U era. And in terms of new hardware, they did release the Switch OLED model in 2021, which probably wasn't super necessary, but as someone who has one, that OLED screen is pretty. As far as the big third-party things, or at least what I was able to find, that happened in 2021. We had Lucasfilm getting the Star Wars exclusivity rights away from EA, which allowed them to shop them around to whoever they wanted. The failed experiment that was Google Stadia had its internal development studios shut down, which pretty much officially was the end for Stadia, because if they weren't going to make any exclusive games for it, what was the point? 2021 was the year of the final E3 ever, question mark. I'm sure someone in the future will try to revive it, but at this point it seems like Summer Game Fest has just replaced it. And then 2021 was the year that we learned of everything horrible about Activision and Blizzard. God, disgusting, honestly. Like I said, I wanted to blow through the intro to get to the games themselves, starting off with the notable snubs. The big games from 2021 that I didn't get to play. And here we have none. Yeah, it actually turns out a lot of the big games that came out in 2021 I did play. I guess it was my kind of year. So then let's jump into the just missed the cut, the games that were about 7 out of 10 on my scale that wouldn't go on one of my 2 proper lists in this video. Again, to blow through what we got, I will give some descriptions on these ones, even though there's quite a few of them. We have the Ghost of Tsushima Iki Island expansion, a nice expansion that does exactly what you expect it to do without fixing any of the big problems that I had with the base game. There was Deathloop, a fun enough game that I've gone back to a good few times and might even go back to again, even though its concept does stale out at some points. There was Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl, which was definitely rough around the edges and clearly had some corners cut, but it was a solid little Super Smash Bros. Melee clone that I think the sequel developed on in a much better way. We have Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania, which I honestly liked Banana Blitz HD a little more than this, believe it or not. I know that's a real hot take, but this is a solidly feature-packed game and a lovely tribute to old school Super Monkey Ball. And then last in this section, Guardians of the Galaxy. Not the most incredible game that you'll ever play, but it is a solid single-player focused game. And especially after how bad Square Enix bombed with 2020's Avengers game, this one was a nice little bounce back. Also, before I get into the cream before the crop, I like to mention some remasters if I could run through them, because that would just waste a lot of time in the actual cream before the crop section if I start talking about remasters. And 2021 was a year with a lot of them, so do I have some remasters to run through? Yeah, sure. I'll give you a few. We have Doki Doki Literature Club Plus, which was a nice way to experience the base game and had a really solid amount of extra content too. There was the Quake Remaster, which I've played through bunches of times at this point because the job that Night Dive did with it is absolutely incredible. And Sonic Colors Ultimate. I could have spent this section venting about the bugs, but honestly I myself didn't really run into any in my playthrough. So I can't speak from experience, though yes, from what I saw of others there were definitely some. But overall I still enjoyed this remaster. There will be a few more to mention later, but we'll get to those when we get to those. For now, cream before the crop. And as usual, we have quite a few games here, so let's not waste any time. Let's jump in. Okay. One final time where I talk about MLB The Show in this much depth. Next video there will be a mention, but not nearly in as deep of a way. MLB The Show 21 actually got me back into the series, not because it was like a new peak or anything like that, but because it was just the most readily accessible. This was the first game in the series to be released on Xbox, and it was also a day one release on Xbox Game Pass. And given that I subscribed to Game Pass as soon as I got my Series X, I thought I would give it a whirl. And let me tell you, booting up my Xbox and seeing the PlayStation Studios logo pop up was a level of whiplash I never thought I'd ever experience. But this game does ultimately hold a lot of cherished memories for me, because it was my first time really labbing the Diamond Dynasty mode to the extent that I did, which is to say completing all of the live series collections. And it was a lot of fun. I've had some problems with some of the MLB The Show games in terms of the grindiness of Diamond Dynasty, but here, I honestly don't think it was that bad. And while this one didn't bring a whole lot new to the series outside of the Stadium creator, and definitely could have been a bigger step forward as the first 9th generation entry in the series, it was still plenty of fun to play around in. Relatively speaking, MLB The Show is probably one of the better sports games that you'll find in terms of not being totally scummy and actually still being pretty fun. And I think MLB The Show 21 definitely proved that. 2021 was a year where Nintendo dropped a bunch of seemingly smaller games, but don't let it get twisted, those games were still plenty of fun. And new Pokemon Snap's existence in general was a pleasant little surprise. The original Pokemon Snap is one of those games I don't think is particularly good, at least not now, but I do enjoy going back to it here and there just because, you know, nostalgia. And it always seemed ripe for a sequel given some of the gimmicks, if you will, that the Wii, 3DS, and Wii U would go on to do. I know there were a lot of people, myself included, who were imagining a Pokemon Snap game with like the gyroscope of the 3DS or the Wii U gamepad. It turns out we finally got that sequel on the Switch, and it actually turned out to be quite good. New Pokemon Snap basically cleaned up every issue that I had with the original game, namely in the controls and performance sections. In its OG form, Pokemon Snap was awkward to control, and it had its share of frame rate issues, but New Pokemon Snap was an all-around much smoother experience that actually managed to capture the first game's potential a lot better. It's just an all-around much more fun and fleshed out journey than the first game, and it's definitely one of the more quietly solid games on the Switch. If you haven't played it yet, I do highly recommend trying it out. It certainly turned out better than the other Pokemon game that came out in 2021. The less we speak of that one, the better. Not sure if you guys were expecting this one, but yes, Scarlet Nexus really caught my eye out of nowhere at an Xbox showcase in 2020. It's funny because, as I've said before, I'm not too big on most anime unless it's the one on my shirt, Cyberpunk Edgerunners. But you give me a cool looking action game with an anime aesthetic and suddenly I'm like a dog who just heard the word treat. And all the talk of this game's brain punk aesthetic really fascinated me and made this a game that I had to try out. So I ended up playing it on the PS5 not long after its launch, and it became a game that I quite enjoyed. It was super slick, the sci-fi based action was every bit as compelling that I'd hoped it would be prior to its release, and it had a really awesome setting and unique implementation of those brain punk elements to go along with that great anime aesthetic that really gave the game a fantastic visual style. The story is definitely a brain screwer and the side quests are honestly nothing to write home about at all, but the overall gameplay is compelling enough to make it work in the end. This is definitely a game worth trying out. If you haven't played it yet, give it a look. Also, what's this I'm hearing that there's an actual anime of this? Someone tell me how it is. I need to know. A proper WarioWare game on a console for the first time since 2007? You know that I was all over this one when it came out. Now, yes, I know that Game & Wario counts as a WarioWare game, but personally, I like to pretend that that one doesn't exist. Either way, WarioWare Get It Together came out in 2021 and was a massive change of pace for the WarioWare series, one that I hadn't seen coming at all. While you still play microgames like a typical WarioWare game, you actually control Wario and the gang in this game. Usually the characters themselves are just in the background as window dressing while you complete the microgames yourself using, I don't know, a touchscreen or a Wii remote or something like that. But here you actually play as them, and they play differently, so you have to use them in unique ways to complete different microgames. It might not necessarily be a gimmick on the level of something like WarioWare Touched or Smooth Moves that really demonstrates what the Switch is capable of, but it makes up for that by being just fresh and incredibly fun, and those changes do help the game to feel a decent bit unique. Also, the story at times feels like a bizarre commentary on game development that's done in the kind of charmingly weird and off-the-wall way that only WarioWare can provide. Personally, I think I would take the next WarioWare game, Move It, over this one, but this is still great fun and well worth playing for yourself. You have no idea how special this one is. Or maybe you do. Chances are you enjoy it too, and chances are you know the story behind it. But if you don't, Metroid Dread was a game title that first appeared in an internal Nintendo document in 2005 as a Nintendo DS game. But it lived in elusiveness because it was never formally announced, nor was it formally canceled by Nintendo. It was only ever subtly alluded to, but not actually alluded to in a maybe not Easter egg in Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. Supposedly, series creator Yoshio Sakamoto was working on it at a point, but he basically abandoned it because the DS's technology wasn't powerful enough to bring his vision to life on it. But eventually, Mercury Steam's excellent work on Metroid Samus Returns in 2017, along with the Switch's hardware, convinced him to revive the project, and thus, at E3 2021, as if it wasn't hype enough to see a brand new 2D Metroid game for the first time since Fusion in 2002, it was revealed to be Dread, and subsequently, screaming ensued. I sure screamed my head off. Even then, when I hadn't really played the 2D Metroid games just yet. I was hyped because as someone who had been researching canceled games and game betas and things of that nature for about 8 years up to that point, Metroid Dread was a name that I had heard get thrown around a lot. So it was awesome to see it actually come out. And then the game actually did come out and I played it, and it was great. It delivers on everything that makes a Metroidvania great, while affording a lot of creativity for exploration thanks to its incredible level design. The boss fights are also some of the best that the Metroid series has come through with at this point, and I gotta say, this is the closest the Metroid series has gotten to realizing my dream for a full-blown horror game, so good on it there. I mean, sure, the Emmy sections are bullshit, but even though Dread isn't my absolute favorite 2D Metroid game, this is a gem and a game that I definitely have to replay at some point. Honestly, when I played and beat it, it was before the difficulty options were added, so now that there is actually an easy mode, what reason do I have to say no, right? Hot damn, given how these videos have gone, y'all probably would have forgotten the Mario Party franchise ever existed. Truth be told, I played several Mario Party games up to this point, and I've had some fun with them. Even Mario Party 10, which a lot of people didn't really like, I got a huge kick out of Bowser Party in that game. But after 2018's Super Mario Party slowly got me more interested in the series, it was Mario Party Superstars where I really got back into it. Quite honestly, it's essentially Super Mario Party but Smash Ultimate-ified, but I don't know, I feel like that gave it an extra layer of charm for me. Essentially, the game is comprised of nothing but content from the previous Mario Party games. All of the boards are based on the classic N64 Mario Party games, while all of the mini-games hail from the first 10 entries in the series. Now, I know you'll probably think that my love for the game is my nostalgia trumping my practicality, but keep in mind, I didn't really grow up with Mario Party like that. I honestly didn't have a Nintendo 64 growing up, so I didn't really play much of the classic N64 Mario Party games. In fact, this game was honestly my first experience with a lot of what classic Mario Party offered. And I think that's why I love it so much, because playing this game made me realize how fun a lot of those classic boards and minigames were back in the day. They're still just as fun today with equally as much charm as in the past, along with some nice quality of life improvements to keep the overall game fresh. It's like they took that 3DS Mario Party the Top 100 game they made and actually decided to make it good. At least from what I understand, because from what I understand, Mario Party the Top 100 wasn't actually that good. But still, this one is. Though I do wish it had gotten some extra DLC or something like that. I know it sounds weird to ask for a game to have DLC, but it felt like the last few Switch Mario Party games were kind of begging for a little more content. Just maybe like another character or two and maybe like a couple more boards. Like imagine if they added some of the GameCube boards here. Like it would be cool if they had like Sweet Dream from Mario Party 4 or Pirate Dream from Mario Party 5. Oh well, game's still fun, and at least we got Jamboree earlier this year. Yes, That's right. Throughout the 2020s, I have gained quite an affinity for games that involve things I'd never want to actually do in real life. You'll see that in the next video for sure. But yes, Unpacking, a game I heard about from an Instagram video that I then found out was on Game Pass, so I just jumped on it because. Like, it sounded ridiculous. When I heard that there was a game called Unpacking, I was like, what? And then I played the game. And I really liked it. It's exactly what it sounds like, a very mellow, chill game involving unpacking boxes and arranging the items from them in your room. You can play it as a proper puzzle game and attempt to place everything normally, or use the setting that lets you throw everything on the floor like a real hooligan. Now, I didn't do that, but I did turn the setting on just to help myself out quite a bit. But either way, again, it threw me for a loop because I was just expecting your average little chill game about unpacking things. But little did I know that this game would actually make me feel things. There's some very nice and subtle emotional lore hidden within the game, as its use of unpacking things takes like a show don't tell approach, and it utilizes a lot of environmental storytelling as well. I'm not kidding when I say that by the time the credits rolled and I heard the game's theme song, Unpacking a Life, I genuinely thought I was gonna start crying. This game proves that there's beauty in simplicity, and honestly, bless Xbox Game Pass for throwing this at me, because I probably would have turned the other cheek to it had it not been there. If you haven't played this yet, I definitely recommend trying it, because it might seem silly, but there's far more than meets the eye to this one. I know, we're closing out the cream before the crop with a bit of a controversial one, but honestly, I can't lie. I really enjoy Halo Infinite. Coming off Halo 5 Guardians being the massive stinker that it was, I was praying for Halo Infinite to be good. And as much as I tried to be optimistic, it was hard when so much of the talk around this game was its messy marketing and development cycle that was filled with issues, a delay, rumors that its Xbox One version was going to be cancelled, and promised features not actually making it into the game. It was a big, ugly mess of a development period, which is why you might be surprised to hear that this game was actually the most fun I've had with Halo in a long time. I was definitely really worried about the campaign going open world, and yes, the open world itself could have been a bit more interesting, but all in all, I think the transition worked out really well, and laid a solid groundwork for what the future of the franchise could do. I think it also proved to be a smart move to release the multiplayer by itself as a free-to-play option. And honestly, even as someone who doesn't play multiplayer shooters, I've actually played a fair bit of Halo Infinite's online multiplayer with my friends. I royally suck at it, but it's honestly quite fun. A lot of the conversation around this game has been on its troubled development and things of that nature, but pushing through that a bit, I've definitely really enjoyed Halo Infinite. And after how bad Halo 5 was, I'm glad to see that even amidst the mess, 343 Industries, or I guess they're called Halo Studios now, was able to bounce back with this one. Just don't develop the next Halo game the way you did this one, okay? So that's the cream before the crop. And now we're going to get on to, not the proper best list just yet, some honorable mentions. For the first time, I'm going to run through a few remasters in the honorable mentions section, just because, again, 2021 had a lot of them, and there were quite a few remasters of some of my all-time favorite games that I've given 10 out of 10s to. So to blow through those remasters, we have Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury. That Bowser's Fury part was actually really, really fun, by the way. Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD, and Alan Wake Remastered. All games I gave 10 out of 10 twos that got notable remasters in 2021, but I wanted to save my breath on them and just say they're great remasters of great games. Because if I talked about them individually, that's basically what it would boil down to. So now we can get into my proper best list, the games that I gave a 10 out of 10 to, and there are 5 here. Starting off at the number 5 spot, we have a game in a series I've been talking about quite a bit in the last few videos, Resident Evil Village. As I said in my last video, 3 Resident Evil games in 3 years, all of them great. The role that Capcom has been on as of late has been magical. Resident Evil Village was the first Resident Evil game that I played fairly close to its release, as I played it a couple months after it launched, after finally getting into the Resident Evil series, and this was honestly one of my favorites in the series, and one of those rare examples of a game that honestly got better the more that I played it. In a lot of ways, I look at this game as almost being like Resident Evil 4, but in first person with more horror elements to it. Because back in the day, RE4 was the point where the series kind of leaned more into the action stuff and kind of veered away from the horror routes before fully making the return to horror with Resident Evil 7. With this one, it felt like Capcom did something that many say you can't do, which is have their cake and eat it too. The action gameplay is great, though it does remember to keep the horror stuff on tap, which is obviously fantastic, and both work out very well, and it doesn't feel like there's an incohesiveness. It feels like there's a nice balance of both. I mean, just on a personal level, the sequence with the baby is genuinely the most scared I've ever been in a video game. I actually remember beating it, and when I was done, I was genuinely like... And that's the first time a video game has ever had me at that level of being scared. It was absolutely crazy. I do still enjoy RE2 Remake and RE7 a bit more than this one, but this is still a fantastic game and by far one of my favorites in the series. At number 4, I mentioned that Xbox and PlayStation both got to have some good first-party games in 2021, and while this one was on Xbox and PlayStation, this was, to me, probably the highlight of Microsoft's year. I gotta go with Psychonauts 2. God, I'm so glad this game got to finally exist in 2021. The original Psychonauts came out in 2005 and was very well liked, but it really was not the biggest commercial hit, which combined with its weird nature made a sequel a hard thing for the team to pitch to publishers. But then eventually 2015 rolls around, and thanks to some increased success of eventual re-releases of the first game, Tim Schafer and co. properly announced Psychonauts 2 as a crowd-funded project, and the game was a go. During its time in development, Double Fine would also be purchased by Microsoft, which I presume gave it a bit more financial backing. I do know that there was a documentary that came out about its development that probably answers that question. I haven't watched it, but you can definitely go check it out yourself. Either way, even though it took a long time for this game to come out, it turned out incredible. Psychonauts 2 basically takes everything the first game did and improves on it in a big way. Between the level design, the puzzles, the platforming, the overall accessibility, Psychonauts 2 is an incredibly clean, polished, and fresh experience that takes the great foundation of its predecessor and improves on it in a pretty huge way. It's also got a great art style, fantastic writing that's funny while also handling serious themes of mental health very well, and dude, I didn't even grow up watching Invader Zim, but Raz is already voiced by Richard Horvitz, and Ricky Simmons is here too. What more do I need to say other than the fact that this game reunites Zim and Gur? Okay, I was partially joking, but otherwise, especially given what most crowd-funded games tend to go through and how they tend to struggle, Psychonauts 2 is an amazing game, and it's really fantastic to see that it made it to the finish line as high quality as it did. And on a personal level, this, along with the Quake remaster that I mentioned earlier, both of which came out at a time when I was pretty sick in August 2021, were much needed pick-me-ups for me at a very difficult time. So they're always going to have that bit of specialness for me. Granted, actually, this one came out right when I was starting to feel a little better, but still, point being, they were huge pick-me-ups at the time. Definitely give this a look if you haven't already. I wonder what Double Fine is up to now. At number 3, a game that I hope you guys have heard of, and I think it's a really, really good one. It's an indie game, but one that definitely has a bit of prestige to it, question mark. I definitely gotta go with Kena Bridge of Spirits. For some reason, I feel like I slept through this when it was shown off at the PlayStation 5 reveal in 2020. Maybe because I was too busy falling out of my chair over Spider-Man Miles Morales and Horizon Forbidden West and another game that we'll talk about in just a little bit. But let me tell you, as soon as I was made aware of what this was, Kena Bridge of Spirits was the apple of my eye. And when I finally played it, I fell just as much in love. Kena, to me, is basically what would happen if you took a game like Horizon Zero Dawn and dropped it into a Pixar world. Beyond being incredibly fun to play, this game is utterly beautiful. I don't ooh and ah at graphics very much, but I distinctly remember when I first played this game, just stopping at so many points and taking so many screenshots on my PS5 because I was so floored by the visuals. I just couldn't stop trying to take everything in. This is really one of the most beautiful looking games that I've ever played. Combine that with really compelling combat, fun puzzles aided by a great mechanic in the Rot, and you have a spirited and incredible first effort from the developers at Ember Lab. It's an impressive game to me in general, but it's doubly impressive that a game like this was made by about 15 developers during peak COVID as their first proper game, and it turned out this good. If you haven't played it yet, absolutely give it a shot. At number 2, the game that was 2021's Game of the Year winner at the Game Awards, and it certainly landed high on my list as well, definitely gotta go with It Takes Two. This was the kind of game that really snuck up on me back in 2021. I didn't really know what it was until the week that it came out, and all I had heard or seen of it was that it was a co-op 3D platformer. Of course, that sounded good enough for me, especially because it came out on the day of another 3D platformer that I had high expectations for that failed. But little did I know what this game would do for me. I mean it with full sincerity when I say that It Takes Two is by far one of the most off-the-wall and creative video games that I've ever played. Being that it's a co-op only game does make it very chaotic, which adds to the fun, but even beyond that, This is a 3D platformer that changes its gameplay styles often, but never feels incohesive. It feels like every genre switch-up makes sense and feels meaningful to the game as a whole, and each change-up just serves to make the game more and more fun. It's also got a beautiful art style that almost feels kind of claymation-esque to some extent, and the story really packs an emotional punch. It's a game about a married couple going through a divorce, basically trying to fix their relationship, and it's beautifully told, even in that one scene that was very dark. You know what I'm talking about. By the way, speaking of which, how the hell did this game get a Best Family Game nomination at the Game Awards in 2021? I know it's a story about family, but it's rated T for teen. It's not a game I'd play with the kids if I had any. What the fuck? It won? That wasn't in the script. I forgot that it actually won Best Family Game. This is why I tell you guys, do not watch the Game Awards for the actual awards. Just watch them for the trailers. Either way, this was a truly beautiful game that I'm happy to see had the success that it did in 2021, and I'm definitely pumped to see what Mr. Fuck the Oscars, Joseph Fares, and his team at Hazelight have coming next. But as great as it was, there was still one game that topped it in 2021, and again, you're probably not going to be surprised to hear this one. You guys are probably already guessing what it is. I've already kind of alluded to it, so let's not beat around the bush any longer. My game of the year for 2021 was Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. That other game I was talking about from the PlayStation 5 reveal event, yep, it was this one. During that show, as hyped as I was for Spider-Man and Horizon because I had loved Spider-Man 2018 and Horizon Zero Dawn, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart was the game that had caught my eye the most. Even though I hadn't really fully finished the other Ratchet & Clank games yet, this just felt like the most next-gen looking game of the bunch. And honestly, I did a whole review of it back when I was at my internship with the Gamer Kit, which is still up on YouTube, and you can actually find that review at the link in the description. So I've already waxed poetic about this game plenty at this point. It's obviously one of my favorite games of all time. Of course, it's a 10 out of 10 game to me. And it's by far my favorite in the Ratchet & Clank series. It's basically the culmination of everything the series has done to this point, and between its incredibly charming story, super smooth combat, and unreal level design, everything about it feels like a love letter to the series. A franchise that I feel has been one of PlayStation's most important and doesn't quite get enough credit for that. I mean, it's pretty much been the longest running series that they still actually make games for. Maybe outside of, I don't know, Gran Turismo. So I feel like it deserves a little more credit for that. And beyond that feeling as a love letter, it was also an incredible showcase of what the PS5 was capable of. Between its subtle but impressive use of the DualSense and the fast loading of the PlayStation 5's SSD as well. Even though the PS5 has had its share of disappointments and there haven't been quite as many incredible next-gen showcases like this one, especially because technology creep and the fact that we're probably not going to see as many of those deep into the future, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart is a real treat of a game, and the kind of game that I think that every PlayStation 5 owner should have. Though it also recently got a release on PC, so if you're a PC player, play this. Whether you're a longtime fan or someone who's never played a Ratchet & Clank game, there's a lot to love about this one. So yeah, that's 2021, a year that at the time felt like a slow year and might have even been, but like many years in gaming, it feels like when you look back, you kind of look and you're like, wow, there were a lot of good games that year. Of course, this was all just my opinion on 2021. What did you guys think of 2021 as a year in gaming? What were your favorite games of the year? What were the games you played the most? What were some games that I didn't mention? Were there some notable snubs that you were like, wait a minute, why didn't you mention that? And as for the question of the video that I always like to ask, I talked earlier about stock shortages in the wake of COVID. So if you got in on the next gen wave, what was your experience with the stock shortages? Were you able to get your PS5 or Xbox Series X and S without much hassle? Did you get them fairly quickly? Did you have to wait? If you were a Switch player, did finding a Switch cause you chaos? Because I know that happened at a point during COVID. Or if you were a PC player, what was it like finding parts at this time? I remember some old team members from my time at the Gamer Kit mentioning how tough it was to find PC parts, so what was your experience? Whatever your thoughts, opinions, and experiences are, leave them down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe and support some of my other ventures that I have linked in the description, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. And next video is the last one in the legacy years of the series, 2022. Obviously, it won't be the last one in general because I'm going to be doing one for this year at the end of the year, but it's the last one of the looking back on past years part of this series. Once the 2022 video is over, this series is just going to end up being a year-end thing. Either way, we're right about at the finish line, so stay tuned for the next video, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.